and generations, all the way back to the days of the Bible and before, people have made an understandable but unfortunate mistake, in my view, and it is this. When we work hard, or when we guess right, or when we just happen to get lucky and things fall our way financially, and we become comfortable or maybe even wealthy, we are right to say that our wealth has come to us from our work ethic or from our willingness to learn and train or from our parents' hard work or even our good decisions. But over the years, there has been this temptation to say that when we've become wealthy, well off, it's God's doing. Or more precisely, it's God's reward. That God has somehow chosen us to be among the wealthy, and that wealth is a reward for our faithfulness, as a sign of our good standing with God. It's so natural to think this way, right? Things are going well, then we must be in good standing with the Creator of the universe. We must be in sync. But this way of thinking becomes a problem when, for whatever reasons, things do not go well. When we are not among the wealthy anymore, or the comfortable even. Because then we are left to assume that when our wealth disappears, God had something to do with that too. When we think this way, that our wealth is a sign of God's favor, we're joining a tradition that is at least as old as the Hebrew Scriptures and maybe even older, and as new as those big old mega churches that preach what we now call the prosperity gospel. In a word, or in 7 words to be precise, this way of thinking says this: the righteous profit, the wicked suffer. That's the basic equation of the philosophy. Many of the religious folks of Jesus' day believed this way. They believed that if someone was poor, it must be because somewhere along the line they had done something wrong and made God, angry or something. The great poem we know as the Book of Job is all about one man's struggle with this way of thinking after he loses everything. Old Job tries to hold on to the conviction, I did not do anything. I do not deserve this. I have been righteous. All the while, his well-intentioned friends sit back and say, think harder, Job. It's back there somewhere. The righteous profit, the wicked suffer. Jesus faced this way of thinking during his ministry. A first-century version of the prosperity gospel, the biblical name for this thread of theology is Deuteronomic theology, and it finds its way in various places in the Hebrew Scriptures. And though Jesus was steeped in this tradition, one of the ways Jesus tried to shift the discussion during his ministry was to call this way of thinking into question. And for our purposes this morning, he did it with a story about one person who was rich and another person who wasn't. He told the story of the rich man and Lazarus. But you know what? He could have also told the story of the sightseer and Lillian. I want you to picture with me, if you will, a woman standing in the doorway of a building in downtown Washington, D.C. Her name is Lillian, dressed in a very old, tattered business suit on a hot July day. Lillian was among the homeless folks who spend their days in Lafayette Park, right north of the White House in Washington, D.C. How ironic is it that one of the most popular places for the homeless in D.C. is right across the street from the White House, the shadow side of the nation's capital, the side where they do not roll eggs on Easter Sunday or pardon turkeys on Thanksgiving. That's where Lillian liked to hang out. It was her spot. But Lillian didn't really beg or panhandle. Her Her style wasn't to confront people or block their way with a request as they hustled along. Instead, Lillian simply stood in her doorway, one of the buildings across the street from the park, holding a paper cup, like a coffee cup, like she was about to take a drink. On this particular hot day in Washington, and I know some of us know a little about hot days in Washington, that city that used to be a swamp. One very hot day, a group of 3 or 4 relatively young women were walking through downtown D.C. on a sightseeing tour. It was Girls' Weekend Out. They had been planning this trip for a while. They were wilting in a pool of heat and humidity, forcing themselves to be enthusiastic about the sights they were determined to see. They were on a mission. Come on, everyone, time to get in line for the White House tour. As they were crossing Lafayette Park, one of the women noticed Lillian, saw her in her doorway, dressed in her old business suit, just standing there. She was touched by the dignity she saw there. The suit, tattered as it was, looked like it might have been a suit she wore when she had good paying work. The reserved way she asked for help. So she told her friends, hold on just a minute. She walked over to put a little something in Lillian's paper cup. As she approached, Lillian saw her coming. The homeless person saw the sightseeing woman who had spent the day in the crock pot that is Washington, D.C. in July. They gave each other a sympathetic look. And then, Lily, the woman in the wool suit in July, reached down in her cup, pulled out 2 crumpled up dollar bills, smoothed out the money, and handed those 2 bills to the tourist, who'd already dug through her purse to get some spare change. Honey, she said, you look miserable. I'm worried about you. Take this and get yourself a bottle of water around the corner. Oh no, you keep it, and here, you take this. But that wasn't to be. So, as the wilted tourist walked away from Lily's doorway, with those 2 wet, wrinkled dollar bills in her hand, she asked the man on the corner selling those water bottles, who looked like he spent most of his days on the street too, do you know what name she has? What's her name? And he looked over and said, oh yeah, that's Lillian. She's here every day. We look out for Lillian. I wonder how many hundreds of homeless folks that woman has seen since that day in Washington. All the rest I'll bet she's forgotten, but so many years later when she is told this story, she remembers this one woman. Because this person had a name, and her name was Lillian. Once people have a name like that, they tend to stay with us. In 3 short years, Jesus told a whole lot of parables. But this one parable, this one about the rich man and Lazarus, this one is the only one of all of Jesus' parables where anyone gets a proper name. This wasn't the parable about the rich man and the poor man. This was a parable about the rich man and Lazarus. Like Lillian, this man had a name. His name was Lazarus. And we don't really know why Jesus chose this one time to give somebody a proper name. Lazarus is the Greek derivative of the man's Hebrew name, which would have been Eleazar. It means God has helped. So that could be it. Eleazar was a fairly common name. Maybe it was just a way of saying just a guy. The other Lazarus in the Bible was a friend of Jesus. Maybe Jesus liked the name. Or the man resembled his friend. We don't really know why Lazarus was given a name by Jesus. But don't you think that one possible reason that Lazarus was named had to do with how important this story was to Jesus? How much he wanted the Pharisees to remember it. Maybe Jesus wanted to be sure, so sure that the Pharisees remembered this message in this story that they gave the man a name. Lazarus, Lily. It's so easy for us to forget the poor, but it's darn near impossible to forget Lillian and her business suit. Maybe that was what Jesus had in mind, naming Lazarus. Among many other things, today is Reconciliation Sunday at Christian Temple. There's literature about it in your orders of worship. Every now and then we do a special offering. This one's for reconciliation. Reconciliation throughout our denomination is a Sunday that began in 1968. The 60s was a decade that produced a lot of good music, but was pretty tough to live through. 1968, just after the assassination of Martin Luther King, the Disciples of Christ began this program nationwide that was aimed at eliminating the root causes of racism, and they called it Reconciliation. Since that time, the Reconciliation offering, received once a year, has been funding programs to eliminate racism. There are lots of programs this ministry has helped through the years. In fact, the Kaleidoscope Arts program we used to have here was one that was funded by Reconciliation. Each of these programs, in their own way, tries to do something very important, which is to help those of us who are different from one another learn each other's names. To be more than the poor and the rich, to be more than black and white, to be more than the blues and the reds, or the gays and the straights. It was so easy for me back then to carry around all sorts of stereotypes, 1968, 69, 70, of African Americans back in the southern Maryland town where I grew up. It didn't matter that those stereotypes were inaccurate because they were so very rarely tested against real people with real names. The very first step of eliminating, or working at eliminating, my racist ignorance came when our high school was integrated, or desegregated, which meant that our high school band was integrated, which meant that we all got to know each other's names while we were sweating it out in the band room, practicing 16th notes. That was only a beginning for me, of course, but it was a beginning for which I am so grateful now. Because that was the year when I met Tim Bridges, who was brand new to our school, who had been bused into our school from Southeast Washington, D.C., and who played the flute like an angel. Tim wasn't the first African-American kid I'd ever seen, but he was the first African-American kid whose name I knew and who became a friend, who was willing to be my friend in spite of all my ugly language and awkward questions. Well, back in Jesus' day, and I suppose in our day too, the poor had no names for the rich. They had no names to the rich. They were just the poor. The poor who must have done something wrong along the way. The poor who live off the scraps that fall into our dumpsters. The poor whose sores go untreated until they get infected. The poor, so easy to ignore until we learn a name or two. So, when Jesus gave one of those poor folks an ordinary name in this story, he was obliging his audience to pay attention. This isn't just a poor man, it's Lazarus. And then once he got our attention, the story invites us to imagine what it might be like to be Lazarus. Imagine, Jesus says, imagine if you had to live a life like Lazarus for all of eternity. Now I have to tell you that I do not believe in a place called hell, where those of us who haven't quite measured up to God's standards will spend eternity. But I do believe in the power of a story told by Jesus to invite us to at least imagine what it would be like to live in the body of someone else. Just imagine what it would be like if you had to live like Lazarus forever. I have a feeling that Jesus is using this parable like he so often uses parables to make his audience uncomfortable. This is a story that would have tapped a nerve. This is the kind of story that got Jesus killed. You know that belief you have, that one that gives you so much comfort by assuring you that since you got it made in the here and now, you've got it made forever? Well, let's just imagine it happening this way. Imagine, Jesus said to the Pharisees. And imagine, Jesus says to us, what would it be like if you were him or he was you? There are so many things we can do to bring God's realm into being, so much reconciliation work to be done. And in this story, I think Jesus is saying that the place to begin all that work is for us to spend some time imagining what it would be like to be the other, to think about how much good that would do to our tired and divided world. Imagine how it would feel to be Lily. To reach down inside that cup and take out those 2 precious dollar bills she worked so hard to get and hand them to a hot and tired tourist who has 10 times that much in her fancy purse. Say to her, honey, you look so tired. Take this and get yourself some water.
We invite you to follow along on the back of your bulletin with the text